There's a lawsuit over Matt Walsh's children's book, Johnny the Walrus. Not all children's books are actually children's books. Some picture books are for grown-ups. Some of them are funny, some of them are artistic, and some of them are parodies. Some of them make political points. Johnny the Walrus is a picture book written by Matt Walsh, a conservative commentator and, one could argue, a professional troll.
You might say that this whole thing is our trolling masterpiece, our Sistine Chapel of trolling.
This book uses the allegory of a child pretending to be a walrus to argue against the idea that children can or should go through gender transition. I try to stay as neutral as possible if I have to talk about political or social issues. I'm not too proud to admit that I find a certain class of keyboard warrior a little frightening because they're totally happy to threaten, dox, and intimidate you if you speak out on certain issues. So I just want to say up front that I'm really not going to get into the particulars of social wars, but really more why this has anything to do with children's books at all, and hopefully nasty people will leave me alone. Johnny the Walrus looks like a children's picture book, but it's really part of a very grown-up political debate. This is a story that's intentionally provocative, and that's not just my opinion. Matt Walsh has said as much when talking about his book.
My approach, I will admit, can sometimes be a little provocative, you know?
Johnny the Walrus came out in 2022 and instantly sparked a debate. This book was not popular with kids, but it was very popular with adults who don't think children should be encouraged to transition. Johnny the Walrus briefly became a bestseller in Amazon's LGBT category. Trans activists lobbied to have the book banned from sales on Amazon in the US, although I noticed you can still buy it in other countries. I'm not a fan of using children or children's literature as missiles in the culture war, but I also don't believe in censorship. Anyone who wants to write a book should, and as long as it doesn't say anything illegal, it shouldn't be banned or stifled or censored. Good arguments win culture wars. If the best argument you have is, I don't like that idea, so it needs to go away, then your side's gonna lose. I've never bothered to talk about Johnny the Walrus before because it seemed unlikely to be a book I would recommend for children. Kids shouldn't have stressful grown-up nonsense dumped on their little shoulders, and I already have plenty of high-quality literature to discuss. But then I heard about the court case involving Johnny the Walrus, so I thought maybe it was time to find out what was in the book. Helpfully, Matt Walsh recorded himself reading it to a group of children. I don't agree with using children as political props in a debate they can't possibly understand, but the content of this book is perfectly legal, and I assume that the parents of the children in the video consented to them being there. I wouldn't take my kids to a reading of Johnny the Walrus any more than I would take them to Drag Queen story time because these events are really for and about adults. I think story time should be centered on the needs and interests of children. But I respect the rights of other parents to take their kids to grown-up political story time, even if I think the kids would have more fun doing something else. Johnny the Walrus is about a little boy who likes to pretend to be different animals. After listening to the internet people, his mother decides to take him to a doctor who whips out a bone saw so he can turn Johnny's feet into flippers.
What?
According to the logic of the internet people, since the boy identifies as a walrus, he needs to be surgically altered to look like one. Eventually, his mother realizes that she can just leave her kid alone, and Johnny is much happier going back to being a kid with a big imagination. The allegory, pictures, and text of Johnny the Walrus are deliberately crude. And that's not my opinion, because Matt Walsh has been pretty open about that when speaking sarcastically about the book's quality.
It's not creative at all. I mean, the comparison between somebody identifying as a different sex and someone identifying as an animal has been done 1,000,000 times. I'm not the first to do it.
The poetry is far from high art, although I have to be fair and say that Matt Walsh did manage to effectively pair the words imagination and crustacean in a rhyming couplet, which was the book's linguistic highlight. There's a character in the book which Walsh identified as the voice of reason, who looks suspiciously like the author. It's a bit on the nose, but I guess that's the point. This is a head-on charge into the battle over child transition. Walsh chose the medium of a picture book, which is suited to telling simple stories, in order to make the argument that transitioning children is absurd. And he deliberately wrote a book of poor quality because he believes that it takes very little effort to dismantle the argument for child transition. As intended, this book sparked a debate. The pro-trans crowd got upset and tried to have the book banned, and the people who liked the book bought it and held it up as an argument against child transition. And Matt Walsh was able to get his personal position out there. He even made merch. In the grand scheme of children's literature, this was really just kind of a blip, and we might never have heard anything about this book again, except Johnny the Walrus is now part of a lawsuit. The Intermountain Education Service District is an organization that provides services to dozens of schools in Eastern Oregon. Smaller rural schools often need to contract out things like office admin, therapy for students with disabilities, and tech support, and Intermountain does that. Roderick Thies is an educational specialist with Intermountain, and in his office he had a copy of Johnny the Walrus, along with 2 other picture books that promote the idea of biological sex over gender identity. He said he never read the books to children and that none of the parents who ever visited his office complained about them. But Intermountain told him that he had to remove this book along with 2 other books because he was creating an environment that was unsafe. They told him that he needed to undergo training about how to make schools safe for transgender children, or he could possibly lose his job. So Mr. Thies is suing. He claims that Intermountain's policies are unfair because his personal beliefs are legal, and his employer has no problem with other people making displays of their legally protected personal beliefs in the office, including pride flags and posters supporting the teachers' union. This is where I'm officially out of my depth as far as legal and HR issues go. I don't know how the First Amendment comes into play here, whether or not it applies in this situation, or if there's merit to his argument that this is unfairly targeting his beliefs while allowing other political beliefs. That discussion is for people who understand the law. I'm just not a fan of how these days people bring their whole selves to work. When I was in elementary school, I didn't know anything about what my teachers believed. I just went to class and learned math and spelling and tried not to be too much of a dork on the playground, with low success. I did live in Oregon for a few years, and I will say that political displays there can be pretty overt. Even if you disagree with Mr. Thies' beliefs, I think it would be useful to consider that his fairly modest desktop protest is likely a reaction to much more overt displays by the other side. Maybe if everyone brought slightly less of themselves to work, we wouldn't end up in these nasty spats, and everyone could focus on doing their jobs, saving ideological discussions for a calm, appropriate setting that doesn't force people to join teams through the presence or absence of classroom flair, or drag children into fights that they shouldn't have to deal with. As far as I'm concerned, this is another troubling way in which children's literature is dragged into the culture war. I support the right of authors to make picture books that look like children's books but are really about grown-up issues. But at the same time, I'd like to remind everyone that children didn't ask for these books. They didn't ask to be part of these fights. They can't fully understand them, and growing up is hard enough without having to carry adult burdens. If you've bought a copy of Johnny the Walrus, or any other picture book for that matter, that really is about adult topics, I mean, good for you. It's your money and you can spend it however you like. But before giving it to a child, maybe you should stop and think, is a kid really going to enjoy this book? Does this really have anything to offer to the interests and development of a child? Is this reading experience going to be about the kid, or is it all about you?